Hello, welcome to EVN Report. My name is Maria Titizian. Last week, we launched our inaugural issue of EVN Security Report. It is a monthly security briefing providing data-driven, in-depth analysis of Armenia's security situation by Dr. Nerses Kopalyan, who joins us now to provide further insights. Welcome to the program, Nerses.
Thank you for having me, Maria.
Armenia's security situation after the 2020 Artsakh War remains perilous. Azerbaijan has utilized both large-scale incursions like we saw on September 13 and 14, as well as using hybrid warfare to justify its egregious violations of the ceasefire. Before we talk about your analysis, could you briefly provide our viewers with the security situation, the context that we saw in September?
So the September security situation is a continuation of what we've seen after 2020 war. Within this context, Armenia's entirety of its security architecture was primarily dependent on Russia. That's why we use the term security dependence. And so the understanding is that Russia provides Armenia proper security, and by virtue of that, Armenia remains part of Russian-led and Russian-designed security arrangements. And so when September 13th happened, this appeared to be somewhat of a watershed moment because it led to a single question that had been lingering for some time, but became more concretely answered after the September 13 wide-scale invasion. Where is Russia as a security guarantor, and why is it not doing anything? And so these questions were not rhetorical questions or politicized questions. These were very honest, objective questions in that it was evident that the security architecture had collapsed, and Azerbaijan appears to have had this sort of, carte blanche to do as it pleases. And so there was no mechanism of curtailing Azerbaijan's behavior. And so this is what made the situation a lot more perilous. Whereas, prior to the September 13 invasion, the general understanding was Russia would not allow something like this to happen. Armenian society had a sense of security that, there are limits to Azerbaijan's aggression, that border skirmishes are one thing, but an expansive absorption of Armenian territory and targeting of over 30 Armenian civilian population centers. These were not anything that have crossed the mind of the average Armenian citizen by virtue of the fact that we have treaty obligations with Russia, and Russia would not allow to do that, would not allow Azerbaijan to do that, because precisely that's what the treaty obligations revolved around. So Russia's abdication of its treaty obligations kind of created all these questions and made the security situation a lot more precarious. So right now, Armenia has a very, very complex situation. Azerbaijan pretty much has troops throughout the eastern border of Armenia. They have taken various important strategic heights, and they remain approximately 4 to 5 kilometers away from Jermuk, the city of Jermuk. And so these are obviously a part of a continuous process because Azerbaijan is actually building military posts in those territories. They are reaffirming, retrenching themselves. And so, this is a continuous process where Armenia's security architecture, not only has it fully collapsed, but whatever remains of it is slowly disintegrating. What this means is that the time has come for Armenia to completely reconfigure its security architecture and address the situation as it exists now, as opposed to these grand understandings of Russia will come to our rescue or to have continuous reliance on Russia.
Right, I do want to get to that a little bit later on, but first, in the report you write that Armenia, lacking military deterrence capabilities, which is very clear, has resorted to intense diplomatic initiatives, both publicly and through back channels, to bring international pressure to bear on Azerbaijan. You coined it diplomatization of its security. And we also saw that the West, the US, France, and the United Kingdom specifically have clearly pivoted their positions, at least in their statements, and have shelved, at least for the time being, this false equivalency that we always would, have to live through when it comes to our region. Today, they are clearly calling out Azerbaijan as the aggressor, specifically after September 13-14, that large-scale attack on sovereign Armenian territory. And more recently, after a video emerged, yet another video war crimes being committed by Azerbaijani troops, summary execution of a group of Armenian soldiers, unarmed Armenian soldiers. Is this the result of Armenia's efforts in the diplomatic realm, or are there other geopolitical shifts taking place that we need to consider and understand and know how to work through?
There are obviously a combination of multi-layered factors. First, indeed, I coined the term diplomatization of security because Armenia does lack the hard power to provide for its security. So what it has done is it has used extensive back-channel diplomatic negotiations, interactions to get specific Western actors that can have and right now have established some level of influence in the region to address Armenia's security dilemma. This doesn't mean that these actors are going to come and rescue Armenia or provide arms for Armenia or solve Armenia's problems. But what they are doing is they're temporarily providing some form of a reprieve, whatever the scope of that may be, which it curtails Azerbaijan's behavior, because the alternative, as we've seen, is Azerbaijan having free range to do whatever it wants. So this is what we mean when we talk about the diplomatization of Armenia's security. Now, as far as the regional configurations are concerned, I have written about this. We have articles on this on EVN where I talk about the American pivot. And my argument is that the Biden doctrine views Armenia as being some form of a democratic region, more of a, I don't want to use the word region, but more of a sort of a specific platform foundation within a region that the United States can base its interests within. They tried this for a long time with Georgia. It did not translate into regional influence. So United States sees a historical opening right now with Russia being exponentially weakened by the Ukraine war, Armenia being in a security need and thus very welcoming of American involvement, even through extensive diplomatic initiatives. And so the combination of Armenia's security dilemma, Russia's weakening, and America's policy shift through a pivot are all contributing to actually the diplomatization of security making sense. If this happened, for example, 2 years ago, this policy of diplomatizing Armenian security would not have worked because, for example, the Trump administration's policies were very, very different. So there are a combination of factors that are aligning, which are allowing Armenia's government to engage with these developments. As far as the Western perspectives go, you made a very, very, very important point on this. And what I would like to talk about is how Azerbaijan indirectly made a hypocrite of the West. And this is not something that the West anticipated. For the longest time, the Western argument was, while we understand and sympathize with Armenia, we cannot overlook the past that Armenian forces absorb or control sovereign territory of Azerbaijan as the West or as the world understood it, right? Within their conceptualization of territorial integrity. But what you have right now is the opposite. The same country that for 30 years, the West, whose territorial integrity that they supported, are now viewing the same country engage in a reverse behavior. So the West has no choice at this point, right, but to be critical of Azerbaijan because there's no other way of going around it. The 30-year narrative that sovereignty and territorial integrity are inalienable, Azerbaijan has turned this upside down on its head, and thus it is sort of forcing the West's diplomatic hand. Also, we have seen to a large extent the collapse of caviar diplomacy. Whereas in the past, caviar diplomacy was this very large-scale grand strategy that Azerbaijan developed that primarily revolved around a single factor, either silencing criticism or producing both sides for egregious necessary behavior. We're not seeing this anymore. Western actors are no longer silent to a very large extent, and they have basically on specific and important issues diverted from engaging in both sides and are directly calling out Azerbaijan. This doesn't mean a huge global shift, but it does mean that the era of being silenced or automatically claiming both sides in the face of obvious facts that has to some extent been overcome. So Azerbaijan has lost the narrative, which was the whole objective of caviar diplomacy. So these are important trends to keep in mind as we understand these shifts.
Okay, so I think at this point it's important to talk about Armenia and Russia, specifically the Collective Security Treaty CSTO, the military alliance the Russian-led military alliance that Armenia is a member of. In your security report, you wrote, and you also mentioned earlier, that Armenia's Russian-led security architecture has collapsed, and Russia remains unable to fulfill its security obligations to Armenia. May I add, unwilling perhaps, but you could talk to that perhaps. Abdicating its responsibility as Armenia's security guarantor. What does this mean, or how will this play out? I mean, how does Armenia, if it were to decide to pivot more to the West, we can't change our security architecture overnight?
True. So United States and France have, to a very large extent, refrained from engaging in discussions of security guarantees or any hard power guarantees. And there's obvious reasons for that. That is a red line for Russia. So if we think situation in Ukraine is bad, crossing those red lines into what Russia considers to be its traditional spheres of influence would produce more complications for Armenia. So this isn't a question of pivoting west through the lens of hard power security. But this is a question of utilizing the resources that the West offers to specifically address Armenia's security architecture. The point is, this isn't about Russia. This is simply about controlling Azerbaijan. If Russia did its job, we would not be having this conversation, whether willing or unwilling. Now, there are obvious reasons that why Russia is struggling to provide security for Armenia. Okay, we know that. But at the same time, we cannot be blind to the fact that the Ukraine war started in February of this year. Azerbaijan has been doing this since 2020, since late 2020. So Russia had ample time, for example, to create parameters around Azerbaijan's behavior, to curtail their behavior. So even prior to the Ukraine war, we had seen Azeri behavior, that directly violated Armenian sovereignty, and Russia's response was inherently about both sidism and being very, very careful not to offend Azerbaijan. So in that context, Russia might be unable through hard power to support Armenia because all their resources are in Ukraine. But nothing is stopping Russia from engaging in diplomatic pressure against Azerbaijan or using a lot of the levers that it has to limit their behavior. And this is one of the more concerning factors. In this context, Russia's calculation is that at this point, they do view themselves to be between a rock and a hard place by virtue of the way things are developing in Ukraine. And because of that, they are not going to alienate Azerbaijan because Russian interests supersede whatever security concerns Armenia may have. And this is something that we have to be conscious of. It is within this specific context that Armenia's diplomatic pivot to the West is revolving around. It's not a question of kicking the Russians out and bringing other troops. There are no other troops to bring at this point. Okay, that's not the conversation.
Okay, but I
so
want
fundamentally, it's basically Armenia's entire pivot revolves around controlling Azerbaijan. It has nothing to do with Russia as far as Armenian policy is concerned.
Until when?
And this is a very important question, until Armenia develops deterrence capabilities. And what we are seeing right now is sort of this hectic drive to increase the security budget to purchase weaponry, because coming back to the initial point I made, after September 13, Armenia realized that it is naked and it is unprotected. So Russia had provided Armenia a false sense of security, telling Armenia, we got your back. But it turns out they don't and they cannot, for whatever their reasons may be. So we have come to the realization that at this point, the objective is to utilize diplomatization of security to buy time. And in the meantime, basically do its utmost to accrue hard power capabilities. And this is what this whole weapons procurement discourse is all about.
Why didn't this happen 2 years ago, Nerses? 2 years
No.
ago, the situation.
Yeah, let me explain to you why it didn't happen, or it could not have happened to the extent that it needed to have happened 2 years ago. One, Russia continued telling Armenia that don't worry about it, we will protect you. Two, Russia was always creating difficulties when Armenia attempted to buy weapons in the international market. Their whole point was, one, we may not allow you, regardless of this whole conversation about you being a sovereign country. Two, if you could purchase it from me, why would you purchase it from someone else? So to address that question, Armenia has purchased contractually a lot of weapons from Russia that have not been delivered. So it's not as if nothing's happened since 2020, okay? So that's one point to make. Second, by virtue of being part of the CSTO, a lot of outlets in the international market through which Armenia may procure weapons are close to us. So some of the conversations that we're having right now is, will, for example, NATO or United States give Armenia some form of temporary waivers to purchase basic defensive weaponry because Russia is not providing it, we can't procure it from them, and we can't be left defenseless. So these are sort of the issues that we're talking about. But in 2020, the dynamics were very, very different. Prior to September 13, the dynamics were very, very different. This is why, we can't really say, well, why did we do this post-2020? Well, we kind of tried. We purchased weapons from Russia, they were not delivered, right? We attempted to have conversations with the Baltics, for example, to buy certain weapons with other countries, and CSTO always became an issue. So we had continuous impediments. And that kind of, better explains the current security dilemma. But I think post-2013, both the Western actors, by virtue of the current engagement with them and the realization that the Russian architecture has collapsed, now the international arms market has become a lot more accessible to Armenia by virtue of these developments.
Okay, so let's now talk about Azerbaijan's grand strategy in all of this post November 9, 2020, when the trilateral statement for a ceasefire was signed. So Armenia is resorting to diplomatic pressure. We have the collapse of Armenia's security architecture and Russia's inability or unwillingness to guarantee any kind of security to Armenia. And then we have the enhancement of Azerbaijan's hybrid warfare tactics. You write in your security report that Azerbaijan's objectives are twofold. So first is capitalizing on the decline of Russia as regional hegemon, which we're seeing in real time, and coercing Armenia into concessions. What methods is Azerbaijan utilizing to achieve these objectives?
So Azerbaijan's method is basically across the broader spectrum of the use of force doctrine. It basically fluctuates from very simple cross-border use of small arms to the large-scale invasion that we saw on September 13. And between that entire process, right, short of the developments that we saw on September 13, the entirety of the process is defined by hybrid warfare or gray zone tactics. What are the objectives of this? Okay, a lot of literature shows that the way developments conclude on the battlefield are crucial in shaping how negotiations will take place. So in the case of Azerbaijan, what was concluded on the battlefield was not what Azerbaijan thought it could achieve. So it is attempting to achieve through course of diplomacy what it was not able to achieve by the November 9 ceasefire. And so this entire grand strategy of hybrid warfare tactics and large-scale incursions are designed to achieve that which it was not able to achieve during the 2020 war. And as far as their methods are concerned, as I noted in my security briefing, and this has been noted by other security scholars, Azerbaijan uses two main tactics. A tactic that's known as salami slicing, which the Chinese have utilized, the Russians utilized some of this, but not to the same extent with Georgia after 2008. And where these are basically methodical processes that Azerbaijan utilizes to create what I call controlled destabilization. And in essence, they create a situation where instability takes place. And they manufacture this instability to basically slice off territories from Armenia or to slice off concessions from Armenia. And then if there is some pressure pending on the pressure, they basically acquiesce to a ceasefire, claiming that, okay, we are now stabilizing the situation. So in this context, Azerbaijan acts as both the aggressor and the peacemaker. And this is how they control the destabilization process. And the underlying objective, of course, is they use the concept of quote unquote provocation, right? Every time there's a sort of a tactical strategy of implementing a salami slicing mechanism, you already see the hybrid process, the misinformation process take place. Armenia is provoking, Armenia is shooting at us, they're setting the grounds, right? Everybody sees this coming. But fundamentally, what we don't see is what is the specific salami slicing tactic to take, for example, 2 square kilometers of territory and create a buffer zone, to take strategic heights that 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 2 months from now, they will initiate another incursion from those sites, et cetera, et cetera. So these are tactics, part of a grand strategy. So just because there was a ceasefire, for example, after September 14, doesn't mean things are going to stay as they are. I guarantee you Azerbaijan is proceeding with the next stage of salami slicing techniques because this is part of their broader strategy. Now, of course, if there's a lot of international pressure and there's more robust US pressure, those tactics would very likely be delayed or they might be strategically shifted. But overarchingly, right, their whole approach is to create controlled destabilization and then agree to a stabilized outcome. But in that process, they have already sliced off certain gains that allows them to consolidate those gains. The other mechanism, and there's a lot of literature on this, is the whole approach of borderization. Russia did this exceptionally well against Georgia in 2008, and Azerbaijan is basically borrowing from that playbook. And this is where you basically is a concept known as elastic geography, where you create ambiguity and you suggest, well, the borders are unclear. Okay, so in that context, if there's lack of clarity, if there's so much ambiguity, what constitutes sovereignty? In this context, I am not making an incursion into the sovereign territory of another country, but rather, due to ambiguity, I'm basically trying to establish what I consider to be within my sphere or potentially my territory. Now, of course, fundamentally, we know this is nonsensical, but this technique is intertwined with salami slicing methods. And this, what it does is it creates new facts on the ground. And it also becomes a new negotiating mechanism. So, for example, prior to these hybrid warfare techniques, if negotiations were purely about Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, now negotiations are about Nagorno-Karabakh, borders, demarcation, delimitation, Azeri forces in Armenian territories, POWs, etc. The more facts you create on the ground, the more negotiating leverage you have. And this is part of their broader grand strategy. So these are kind of what we're seeing, the techniques that they are using to further disintegrate Armenia's security architecture.
So basically, right now, as it stands, from my perspective and from the perspective of many of us living in Armenia, is that we're in this kind of holding pattern, waiting for the next attack or waiting for the next incursion or the next destabilizing military action or whatever it is. My question to you, maybe this is a difficult or unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. We're talking about Azerbaijan's grand strategy. And the reason I bring this up, Nerses, is because, we've been having these conversations forever, especially after 2020. What are Armenia's options? What is Armenia's grand strategy? At this point, from what I see, from my perspective, is let's hold them off until we can increase our deterrence capability. But that is not a plan.
No. Right. So here's the problem. Armenia has never had a grand strategy for the last 20 years. Its grand strategy was, let's rely on Russia, which created a moral hazard, right? And, moral hazard is a concept where you basically become lazy and unproductive and you rely on someone else to solve your problems. So Armenia's security architecture, right, clearly showed both in the 2016 four-day war, the 2020 war, and the current developments that we had created a moral hazard. But the issue is we fell behind to such an exponential extent that catching up is impossible at this point. Okay, basic regression models show the exponential growth of Azeri armament, quality of military improvement, training the soldiers, development of military tactics, and Armenia being stagnant. Okay, so the complete disconnect between one side's exponential growth and the other side's very limited growth cannot be mitigated in a year or two, especially considering the fact that Armenia does not have the monetary and financial capabilities to catch up with Azerbaijan, who keeps pumping billions to maintain this disparity. So it's not as if Azerbaijan won the war and they're like, okay, we're going to take it easy. No, they continue arming because that is their part of their grand strategy. So Armenia is playing both catch up and trying to preserve itself in a very precarious situation. So it's an extraordinarily difficult situation you're in. Within this context, you cannot really have a grand strategy. What you could have are a set of mid-range strategies to alleviate specific problems. And once you have resolved the immediate security dilemma, then you develop a grand strategy. So at this point, Armenia is basically engaging in a set of mid-range strategies. What are these? One, as I discussed, is the diplomatization of security, right? Intensely relying on the United States, on European actors, on France to pressure Azerbaijan from engaging in any kind of egregious behavior. And with the collapse of caviar diplomacy or the weakening of it, and Armenia right now being able to shape the narrative as being subjected to a predatory state, these to some extent are playing dividends. So that is one part of it, but that in of itself is not a solution. Another strategy is to take this to the UN Security Council. France has been very helpful with this. The United States has been very open to it. And very recently, with the UK coming along and basically having the same talking points as the United States, there is a consensus that everybody would say Azerbaijan has to go back to its initial borders, and then we're going to have conversations after this. So if you're able to get a UN Security Council resolution, right, what that's going to do is that's going to basically institute the security of your borders and create another diplomatic deterrent against Azerbaijan. Again, it's not going to be enough to give us 100% security guarantee, but it's something that you may have that you currently do not have. That can also be used as leverage for other countries to put more pressure on Azerbaijan. And of course, the third mid-range strategy is weapons procurement. We're seeing a lot of this sort of, discussion, a bit of a cheerleading going on about the purchase of, some $260 million of Indian weaponry, mid-range missiles, so some anti-drone technology, so on and so forth. But that is very, very minimal right now. But it's a first step, right? Armenia needs to procure at least $700-800 million in weaponry to be able to maintain a security parity. And fundamentally, if we're going to come close to any grand strategy, okay, at this point, we're fusing diplomatization of security, utilizing international institutional instruments such as the UN Security Council, and weapons procurement at an aggressive level. Our one main grand strategy would be the concept that we call military hedgehog, where Armenia becomes a military hedgehog, where it doesn't have offensive capabilities, but attacking Armenia will be very costly to its neighbor. So, a bear would not attack a hedgehog, who just lets the hedgehog alone, okay? Nobody attacks a hedgehog, but then the hedgehog also doesn't attack anyone else. So this needs to be Armenia's next grand strategy, basically becoming defensively powerful that it deters anyone from attacking you. And that is a conversation you could have even at the international level, where if you do try to purchase weapons, and in the past they had concerns about this because they thought you might be aggressive, you might try to get more territories, or your CSTO members, so on and so forth. Right now, if your conversation is we only want defensive weapons and we don't want offensive capabilities, I think that opens more markets to you. So these are kind of the general theoretical arguments that I would proceed with.
Nerses, our time is running out. I want to thank you for this very interesting conversation, very difficult conversation, actually, sort of coming face to face with what our reality is and how limited our choices are. Thank you for putting together the security report. As I said, you will be doing this once a month for EVN report. I think it's a very important endeavor that we're trying to fill a gap right now in the public discourse, because there's so much that we don't know about what is taking place, and it's important for us to understand so that we can also prepare for future developments. So thank you very much for this conversation, and we'll be doing this once a month with you after each publication of our security reports. And for our viewers who do want to check it out, it's on our website, it's on the front page, it's called EVN Security Report, and it is very eye-opening. So thank you, Nerses.
My pleasure, Maria. And just to quickly add one point, the literature on and the research on security in Armenia is indeed, as you noted, a deficiency and a very big gap. And this also contributes to a lot of the misunderstanding and insecurity that both Armenian society and the diaspora has. So it is fundamental, it is vital that we don't simply have analysis based on opinion or perceptions, but content that is research developed, that's methodologically driven, that's data driven, that could actually provide answers to the severe problems that we're facing and can better help us understand why we are at where we are at.
Thank you again.